She couldn't carry a child, so they chose a surrogate, someone they trusted. But the day after the baby was born, she found a photo on her husband's phone that changed everything. Her name wasn't on the birth certificate. Nurses called someone else mom, and then came the worst lie of all. She's not even the real mother. What began as a dream turned into a web of betrayal, missing paperwork, and one final twist in court. If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to erase you from your own family, this story will break your heart and make you look twice at what trust really means. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The house was still when Emily padded into the kitchen. The baby was asleep in the nursery, swaddled tightly in the bassinet that Emily had arranged weeks in advance, every fold of fabric picked with care. A soft hum from the refrigerator filled the silence, and the faint light from the range who'd cast a dim glow across the counter. Her body ached an ache that had nothing to do with labor because she hadn't gone through that. Ava had. But the emotional exhaustion had settled just as deeply. Nathan's phone buzzed once on the counter. It was 3:27 a.m. Emily barely looked at the screen, expecting a weather alert or spam, but the preview caught her eye. A text from Ava, no message, just an image. She hesitated, then picked up the phone. There was no password. Nathan had never locked his phone before, claiming he had nothing to hide. And until now, Emily believed that. But as she tapped into the message thread, her fingers felt slow, almost reluctant. The photo was still there, attached to a text that simply said, "For your eyes only." It was taken in the hospital. But not the hospital room Emily had sat in. In the photo, Ava lay in bed, clearly post-delivery, cradling the baby. She looked tired but radiant, her hair pulled back loosely, her eyes fixed on the newborn with a warmth that was almost maternal. But what unsettled Emily wasn't Ava, it was Nathan. He stood beside the bed, not where Emily had been waiting to be called in, but right there next to Ava, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He wasn't smiling at the baby, he was smiling at Ava, and the look on her face wasn't just gratitude, it was familiarity, comfort. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the image, replaying the moments of the previous day. She'd waited in the hallway for nearly 40 minutes. Nurses had told her Ava wasn't ready for visitors yet. Nathan had gone in ahead just to check on her. He'd said, "Make sure everything's okay." She hadn't questioned it, hadn't wanted to seem possessive or impatient. This had been a long journey for all of them. Trust had been the foundation. That was the agreement. But now, as she scrolled up the message thread, her stomach twisted. There were photos going back weeks. Ava sending sonogram pictures that hadn't been shared with Emily. Notes like, "He kicked this morning while I was thinking about you," and "Don't forget our next secret appointment Thursday, 2 o'clock. Emily's mind stumbled on that. Word-hour. The timeline didn't make sense. She had been at most of the major medical appointments, or so she thought, but here were images and updates from Ava's private clinic visits, pictures of baby items Ava said she'd picked for US. And Nathan always replied, not always with words but with hearts, emojis, little flirts Emily hadn't seen from him in years. She sat down at the kitchen table, phone still in hand, her fingers tightening around the edges. Her chest rose and fell, uneven and shallow. Wasn't part of the plan. She and Nathan had talked for years about surrogacy. After her second miscarriage, and then the surgery that left her unable to carry, they'd both cried through the decision. Nathan had said they would do it together, that no matter what, this baby would be theirs. She had picked Ava herself, a friend of a friend, someone who seemed grounded, kind, generous, a woman who said she wanted to help make a family whole. Now, as Emily sat in the quiet kitchen, one day after holding her daughter for the first time, she felt a wave of nausea rise. The photo wasn't just a mistake, it wasn't just an oversight, it was a message, a window into a world that had been forming without her, one she hadn't been invited into. Footsteps creaked from the hallway. Nathan's voice, low and sleepy. "Em, you okay?" She turned the phone face down on the table. "Yeah," she said, barely above a whisper. Just ... couldn't sleep. But her mind was racing. The baby's name hadn't been entered on the hospital record. The discharge forms had gone through Ava. Nathan had insisted it was just logistics, that it would all be corrected later. And now, Emily wondered if later had never been part of the plan at all. The clinic waiting room had all the warmth of a dentist's office white walls. Stale air, a coffee table with outdated parenting magazines. Emily sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the second hand tick around the plastic wall clock. Nathan sat beside her, legs stretched out, ankle resting over his knee like he had somewhere better to be. They had been coming here for almost a year, first for consultations, then egg retrieval, then embryo storage. Now they were back for the next step, choosing someone to carry their child. "I still don't understand why we need to go through an agency," Nathan had said a few nights before, standing in their kitchen with a glass of wine. "We know people who care about us. Why would we hire a stranger?" Emily didn't argue. She had spent hours reading surrogacy forums, watching legal advice videos, and downloading medical papers. But Nathan didn't like the tone of professional detachment that agencies brought. He wanted this to feel personal, human. She had finally agreed mostly to keep the peace. It was her friend Leslie who had made the suggestion. "What about Ava?" she'd asked casually during brunch. "She's been talking about doing surrogacy for years. Not for the money either, just wants to help someone." Ava was 32, recently divorced, no kids of her own. She worked in community arts programs and had a way of talking that made people feel seen. Emily hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but they'd met a few times through Leslie backyard barbecues, game nights, birthday dinners. Nathan had seemed surprisingly open to the idea. "I remember Ava," he said when Emily brought it up. "She's sweet, quiet, but funny." The next week they met with Ava at a cafe near the library. The three of them sat by the window, sunlight spilling over the table, catching on the rim of Ava's mug. She looked the same as Emily remembered: long, auburn hair, soft eyes, a calm voice that made everything she said sound thoughtful. "I want to do this for someone who really wants to be a parent," Ava said, "not just for a paycheck. I've thought about it for a while. I can't have kids of my own, not right now, but I still want to be part of something meaningful." Emily felt her eyes sting. The way Ava spoke so plainly, so sincerely, was disarming. And Nathan watched her closely, nodding along his coffee untouched. They didn't sign anything official that day, just talked through expectations, what Ava would need, what they would cover. Emily mentioned lawyers, contracts, escrow accounts. Nathan waved it off. "We'll get there," he said. "Let's just take it one step at a time." Over the next few weeks, Ava underwent all the necessary testing. The clinic confirmed she was a viable candidate. Emily took care of the logistics, scheduling appointments, coordinating medication pickups, checking insurance loopholes. Nathan handled the tone, keeping everyone upbeat, texting Ava jokes, occasionally going to appointments when Emily had work. They had one embryo transferred on a cold Thursday morning. Emily held her breath through the whole procedure. Nathan held Ava's hand. Afterward, they all went for pancakes. When the blood test confirmed the pregnancy a week later, Ava texted them a photo of the test strip and a row of red heart emojis. Emily had stared at the screen, waiting for the thrill to hit. Instead, it was a quiet unease that crept in. Something about how icily it was all moving. How quickly Nathan replied with a message that said, "Our little miracle." There were no major red flags, no obvious signs of trouble, but Emily noticed small things: how Nathan offered to drive Ava to her appointments, even when Emily could have done it. How he talked to Ava more easily than to her sometimes. How his eyes softened when Ava laughed. Still, she told herself that trust was the reason they'd chosen Ava. Trust, not convenience. They had skipped the legal contract in the early weeks, choosing instead to draft a simple letter of intent with a friend of Nathan's who practiced estate law. Emily had asked about formal surrogacy protections, but Nathan had reassured her, "We're all friends. We don't need to treat this like a business transaction." Emily wanted to believe that. She had too, because now they were all in. Emily still remembered the second miscarriage in pieces, blurred ultrasound images, a nurse's hand on her shoulder, and the sterile hush of a hospital hallway just before dawn. They had told her not to blame herself, but the weight of those words never quite left. Each time someone said it wasn't your fault, it somehow made her feel more at fault, as if the universe had simply decided her body wasn't meant for this. After the second loss, her doctor had been gentle but firm. A third attempt would carry serious risks: scar tissue, thinning uterine walls, blood clotting markers that wouldn't resolve. It wasn't just about carrying a baby to term. It was about surviving the attempt. She and Nathan had left the clinic that day in silence. He drove them home. Hands clenched at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road like it might give him a better answer. Emily had watched the landscape blur past the window, wondering if this was where the story ended, not with a child in her arms, but with a quiet retreat into acceptance. For a few months, they avoided the topic. They focused on work. They redecorated the spare room, not as a nursery, but as a guest room. They hosted friends for dinner, smiled, pretended. Nathan had suggested a trip to Ireland that spring, something spontaneous and free, but Emily couldn't bring herself to go. The idea of travel felt hollow when what she had longed for was something still and rooted, something that would cry at 3 a.m. and call her mother. Then one night in January, she brought it up again. What if we tried surrogacy? Nathan had been reading in bed, glasses slipping slightly down his nose. He looked at her over the top of the page as if the idea had never occurred to him. Like, hire someone. No, I mean yes, but not like that. Someone we trust. Someone who would do this with us, not for us. It started from there. Not a plan, just a possibility. Emily spent her evenings reading through surrogacy laws, clinics, IVF timelines, agency, pros and cons. Her browser history was full of fertility acronyms and parenting. She created folders for possible clinics. She kept notes. She tried not to get excited because excitement had betrayed her before. The first embryo transfer had failed. It was expected, the doctor said. Not unusual. Try again. They still had viable embryos, left healthy ones. The science was promising. Hope was statistical, now reduced to charts, margins of error, and the slow churn of probability. When Ava agreed to be their surrogate, Emily allowed herself a small space for belief again. She didn't open the nursery closet or take tags off the onesies she had tucked away in storage, but she did start planning. Names, layouts, what color to paint the walls. She let herself imagine birthdays and first steps and that fluttering. The moment when someone says mama for the first time, Nathan seemed relieved to have something forward-facing to hold on to. He threw himself into practical tasks, setting up bank accounts for medical reimbursements, organizing furniture, creating spreadsheets for scheduling. He spoke to Ava often, sometimes late into the evening, checking on her, keeping her company. When she felt lonely or sick, Emily told herself this was kindness, shared investment. The three of them were part of something extraordinary, a team, and every ultrasound, every milestone made that dream feel more real, more earned. There were days Emily felt distant from it all. She couldn't feel the baby move, couldn't track her own symptoms. Sometimes she'd press her hand to her belly out of habit and then remember it wasn't hers, the baby was hers. But the experience, WASN, single quotes, she tried to bond in other ways attending. Every doctor's appointment, knitting a blanket stitch by stitch, writing letters to the child she would one day read aloud. She didn't speak about the fear, not even to Nathan, that this miracle might come at a cost she couldn't name yet, because some dreams require sacrifice, and Emily had already given up everything her body could offer. The suggestion came over dinner, slipped between bites of pasta and sips of wine, casual like it had been an afterthought. She's having a hard time finding a short-term rental, Nathan said, twirling spaghetti on his fork. Landlords don't want a 7-month lease, and hotels are expensive. I told her we should just have her stay here. Emily looked up slowly from her plate. Here, in the house. Nathan nodded like it was obvious. Just until the baby comes, maybe a month or two. It's not like she'll be in the way. Emily didn't answer at first. She looked around the kitchen, quiet, dimly lit, the dishwasher humming in the background. The walls still held little flourishes she had added over the years. Family photos, a chalkboard calendar with her handwriting, magnets with vacation snapshots, her space, their space, Nathan added, and we can help if she needs anything. Emily set her fork down. I thought the plan was to keep boundaries. She's the surrogate. That's already complicated. It's not complicated, he said too quickly. She's part of this process. We all are. And she's not a stranger. You picked her. Emily tried to process the suddenness of it. Ava hadn't asked her directly. The request had gone through Nathan, and now the decision was presented as settled, like something she had already agreed to, "I need time to think," she said quietly. Nathan leaned back in his chair, sighing. "It's not a big deal. She'll stay in the guest room. It's temporary. And look, we'll all feel better knowing she's nearby in case anything happens." Emily didn't argue that night, or the next. By the third day, Ava had brought over a suitcase and a set of neatly folded clothes. The guest room, once repurposed from what was meant to be a nursery, was quickly rearranged. Emily helped make the bed. Nathan set up a small reading lamp. They all smiled like it was a normal transition. Ava moved with a kind of quiet grace, always asking before taking something from the fridge, offering to do laundry or help with groceries. She cooked once or twice, always simple meals that made the kitchen smell like rosemary or cinnamon. She complimented Emily's decorating. She laughed at Nathan's jokes. She was easy to be around, too easy. Within a week, small routines shifted. Nathan started making breakfast for 2 scrambled eggs the way Ava liked them. They took morning walks together around the block, Ava saying she needed the fresh air, Nathan offering to join just in case she got tired. Emily stayed behind, telling herself it was better for Ava to have support. At night, Ava sat in the living room with her feet up, leafing through parenting magazines, talking about names and baby clothes. Nathan chimed in with ideas. Emily listened. From the hallway, sometimes watching them through the crack in the door before stepping in, it wasn't that anything was overtly wrong. Ava never crossed a clear line. But the lines had started to blur, and that felt more dangerous. She laughed at Nathan's stories as if they had history. She used "we" a little too freely when talking about the baby, and sometimes Nathan used it to dot. Emily tried to insert herself to offer suggestions, make plans, create boundaries without making it obvious. But it always felt a beat too late. Conversations had already happened without her. Decisions were made before she joined the room. One evening, Emily walked past the guest room and saw Ava sitting on the bed, Nathan leaning in the doorway. They were talking quietly, something about the baby kicking harder at night. Ava laughed and touched her stomach. Nathan smiled and touched it too. Emily froze. She didn't say anything. She didn't knock. She kept walking, heart pounding in her ears, her thoughts spiraling too fast to catch. Later that night, in bed beside Nathan, she asked, "Do you think this is working? All of us under the same roof?" He didn't open his eyes. "It's fine. You worry too much." She lay awake long after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, wondering when we had stopped including her. It was just after noon on a Saturday when Emily came back from the grocery store. The bags in her arms were heavy milk oranges, bread, a few things Ava had requested that morning. She nudged the front door open with her hip and called out softly, "Hello, I'm back." There was no answer at first. The house felt unusually quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Emily set the bags down in the kitchen and started toward the hallway, intent on asking Nathan to help unload. Her footsteps were light on the hardwood floor, and the afternoon sun streamed in through the hallway windows, casting long rectangles of light across the floor. She turned the corner at the end of the hall and stopped. Just ahead, near the linen closet, Ava was standing close to Nathan. Too close. Her hand was on his chest, fingers lightly curled against the fabric of his t-shirt. Nathan's head was tilted down, their faces only inches apart. It was the kind of moment that could be explained a dozen different ways, but it looked like, not long, but long enough. Nathan didn't move, at least not at first. Then he stepped back, one hand raised slightly, palm out, not forcefully. Emily couldn't hear the words. Ava gave a small laugh, almost embarrassed, and turned toward the guest room. Neither of them had noticed her yet. Emily stood frozen for a second, then stepped deliberately forward, letting her keys jingle in her hand. "Hey!" she called out, her voice steady. "Can someone give me a hand with the bags?" Nathan flinched and turned, his expression shifting rapidly: surprise, guilt, calculation. "Oh hey," he said. "We didn't hear you come in." Ava had already disappeared down the hallway. Emily didn't look after her. "What was that?" she asked, her tone carefully flat. Nathan's face settled into something practiced half-concern. "What was what?" "I saw her kiss you." He blinked. "It wasn't like that. It wasn, single quotes, T, ... It was nothing." "I saw it." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She's emotional, the hormones, we were just talking. She got overwhelmed. It was instinct." Emily didn't answer. Nathan stepped closer. Come on, Em. She met his eyes. I saw you let it happen. He exhaled, frustrated. Do you honestly think I'm involved with her? After everything we've been through? After all this, Emily? Didn't respond right away. Her mouth was dry. Her chest felt tight. She looked at him, really looked hand, tried to reconcile the man standing in front of her with the version of him that had held her hand in the fertility clinic, who had cried beside her after the second miscarriage, who had whispered, "Will," she said finally, "even if you're not admitting it to yourself." Nathan didn't answer. He just looked at her, tired, defensive, uncertain. They stood in silence until the weight of it forced them apart. Emily turned and went back to the kitchen. She began unpacking the groceries in slow, deliberate motions, the plastic bags crackling too loudly in the quiet house. That night, Ava stayed in her room. Nathan kept glancing at Emily across the dinner table, as if waiting for a conversation that never came. Emily said little, pushing food around her plate, her eyes lingering on the empty chair beside them. She didn't mention it again. Ask Ava about it. Didn't bring it up in the days that followed. But she didn't forget. She couldn't. It was just after 2 a.m. when Emily's phone rang. The ringtone was sharp in the silence, jolting her awake. She fumbled on the nightstand, heart already racing. The screen showed Ava's name and a single word below it. Calling, she answered. Immediately, "Ava, what's wrong?" Ava's voice was strained, breathless. "It's happening. I think it's early, but the contractions started around midnight. I'm at the hospital now." Emily sat up fully. "Wait, what? Why didn't you wake me, Nathan?" "And I called Nathan. He's already here," Ava interrupted. "He said he didn't want to wake you. I don't know. They're moving me to a room now." The line went dead. Emily sat motionless for a moment, phone still pressed to her ear, her pulse pounding in her neck. She threw off the covers, heart pounding. The hospital bag she had packed weeks ago was still by the front door, untouched. The carefully written birth plan they had all agreed to was folded inside it. She dressed in a blur sweatpants, a hoodie, mismatched socks, and drove through the dark city streets with headlights sweeping past empty storefronts. The hospital loomed ahead, its windows glowing under a blanket of clouds. Emily parked in the garage and ran across the lot, the soles of her sneakers slapping the pavement inside. The receptionist looked up from her screen. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for Ava Moran," Emily said quickly. "She's in labor. I'm Hurwell. I'm the intended mother." The woman typed something, frowned, then picked up the phone and called upstairs. A nurse arrived 5 minutes later, holding a clipboard. "You said you're with Ava?" the nurse asked, eyes flicking to Emily's face. "Yes, I'm she's. Our surrogate, my husband and I, are the intended parents." The nurse hesitated, then smiled tightly. "You can come with me." They walked through a maze of corridors, past vending machines and nurses' stations. Emily tried to calm her breathing. She expected the nurse to explain what was happening, how far along Ava was, what room she was in, whether she was okay. But the nurse said nothing. When they reached the maternity wing, Emily was led to a waiting area with beige chairs and a television playing low. "She's already with someone," the nurse said. "You'll have to wait here." Emily blinked. "With who?" The nurse gave a polite smile. "Her partner." Emily's stomach dropped. "Her partner? Mr. Delgado. He's already in the delivery room." Emily felt her knees weaken slightly. "I'm his wife," she said, barely above a whisper. The nurse's expression faltered. "Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I wasn't." No one said. "Just wait here. I'll check." But she was already walking away, and Emily was left standing in the waiting area, arms wrapped tightly around herself, trying to push down the rising panic. The birth plan had been clear. Emily was supposed to be there for the delivery, by Ava's side. Nathan too, yes, but as a united front, Emily had spent hours preparing for this moment, treating articles about bonding, postpartum care, how to hold her child for the first time. Her child, she waited. Minutes passed, then half an hour. Nurses moved past without looking at her. The television played on her phone. Buzzed one new text from Nathan. "Everything's okay. Don't worry." No explanation, no room number, no invitation to come in. She stared at the message until the screen dimmed. An hour later, a nurse returned and told her Ava was stable. The baby was born. A girl. Healthy. Didn't cry. Not then. She just nodded and asked to see her, but visitation had to be cleared. And there were forms, signatures, protocols that hadn't been followed because no one told the hospital she was the mother. On the records, Ava was listed as both biological and legal guardian. Nathan, as next of kin. Emily sat down in the waiting chair, fingers curled tightly in her lap, as somewhere behind a closed door. Her daughter was crying for the first time, and Emily wasn't there. The clerk behind the hospital's administrative desk tapped at her keyboard, then tilted her head slightly to the side, frowning. Emily stood on the other side of the glass partition, clutching the hospital folder they'd handed her earlier, a thin stack of discharge forms, immunization records, and a tiny birth certificate worksheet with blank spaces where her name should have been. "I'm sorry," the clerk said, squinting at the screen. "I don't see your name listed here." "Are you sure you're the mother of record?" Emily tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm the intended mother. We went through surrogacy. The baby was born yesterday. Ava Moran is the surrogate." The woman nodded slowly. "I see Ava listed, and the father Nathan Delgado, correct?" Emily nodded. "Yes, that's my husband." The clerk's fingers paused on the keyboard, but there's no legal documentation in the file indicating intent for parentage transfer. There's no surrogacy affidavit, no court order, no declaration. Without that paperwork, we can't legally list you as the mother. Emily's mouth went dry. "That's not right. We were supposed to file that. My husband said he took care of it weeks ago." "Well," the clerk shifted slightly, glancing down at the open folder on her desk. "Nothing is on file. We've got a standard live birth form signed by Ms. Moran. She listed herself as mother and Mr. Delgado as father. That's all we have." Emily's hands gripped the folder tighter. She felt heat rise in her chest, not anger, exactly something sharper. Fear. "Can I speak to whoever oversees the records? There has to be a way to correct this." "There's a process," the woman said gently, "but it usually begins before the birth. If the surrogacy documents weren't submitted, then legally, the mother on file is the woman who gave birth. You'll have to file a post-birth parentage petition through the county." The word petition hung in the air like a warning. Emily didn't speak right away. She stared through the glass as if it might rearrange itself into something more reassuring. The hospital hallway behind her felt suddenly colder. Mothers passed by with infants cradled in blankets. A volunteer pushed a cart of tiny pink and blue caps. Smiling at a man who looked nothing like Nathan. She finally whispered, "Can I at least get a copy of the form, the one Ava signed?" The clerk hesitated, then printed it without argument. Emily stepped aside, clutching the page, her eyes scanning the signatures. There it was. Ava's long looping name scrawled in the space for mother, and just beneath it, Nathan's name printed in sharp strokes, no space for her name, no addendum, no asterisk, just blank lines where she should have been. She walked slowly back to the waiting area where Nathan sat, legs stretched out, phone in hand. He looked up when she approached. "Everything okay?" Emily held the form in front of him. "Did you—" "No." Nathan furrowed his brow. "No. What?" "That I'm not listed anywhere. Not even as a co-parent. The hospital has no paperwork, no court filings, nothing. It's like I don't exist." He glanced at the page, then away. "It must be a mistake. Maybe it didn't get processed yet. I thought the lawyer sent it in." "What lawyer?" Her voice cracked. "You never told me who you were working with." "I used someone, my firm. Recommends it was supposed to be simple, routine." She sat down next to him. "But you never showed me. I asked you 3 times. You said it was taken care of. I thought it was." She looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't surprised. There was no panic in his voice, no rush to fix it, just vague assurances and shallow concern. He reached out as if to touch her hand, but she pulled it away. "You signed that form, Nathan. With Ava, you didn't even tell me she was in labor until after it had started. And now, I'm not even listed as this baby's mother." He sat back in the chair, exhaling. "It's paperwork, Emily. We'll fix it." But she was already shaking her head, because something deeper than paperwork had been broken, and no form could sign her back into the place she was never given. Emily stood at the foot of the hospital bassinet, watching the baby sleep. Her daughter's chest rose and fell in tiny, even breaths, one hand curled into a loose fist near her cheek. The pastel beanie the nurse had given her was slightly oversized. Slipping over her eyebrows, Emily gently adjusted it, her fingertips trembling slightly as they brushed the baby's forehead. She hadn't slept much. Between the late-night forms, the missing documents, and the knot that had formed in her stomach ever since she learned her name wasn't on the birth certificate, everything felt suspended. The baby was here, but the role Emily had dreamed of, stepping into felt ... unofficial, inanchored. Like a position she had to audition for, the nurse entered the room briskly. A woman in her late 30s with bright eyes and a laminated badge that read Marcy Neonatal Care. She smiled warmly. When she saw Emily, "Oh good, you're still here. Time for vitals." Emily stepped aside. "Of course." Marcy wheeled a cart to the side of the bassinet and gently lifted the baby's swaddled form. She checked the baby's temperature, her heartbeat, the ID bracelet on her ankle. Her movements were practiced, competent, full of care. Emily watched closely, trying to learn by observation how the nurse supported the neck, how she held the thermometer just long enough, how she murmured softly under her breath to keep the baby calm. "She's doing beautifully," Marcy said, looking up with a kind smile, already back to her birth weight. "Very alert, too," Emily smiled back, tentative. "That's good to hear. I've been trying to ... just stay nearby. Learn everything I can." "You're doing great," Marcy said as she adjusted the swaddle. Then she turned to place the thermometer back on the tray and said, casually, "Where's Mom this morning?" Emily blinked. For a second, she didn't respond. Marcy turned around, her hand still hovering over the clipboard. Her expression unchanged until she saw Emily's face. "Oh, I mean sorry. I meant the surrogate. Ava, right?" Emily tried to keep her face neutral, but something in her stomach twisted. She looked down at the baby, still sleeping peacefully. "She's resting," Emily said quietly. "She's in recovery on the second floor." Marcy nodded. Quickly, cheeks flushing. Of course. Just habit. Sorry. We use the term a lot, Mom, especially in postnatal." "It's fine," Emily lied. Marcy picked up the clipboard and jotted something down, suddenly focused on her notes. The warmth in the room thinned. The conversation was over. A few minutes later, the nurse was gone, and the baby was asleep again. Emily sat in the recliner near the window, her arms wrapped around her middle, staring at the bassinet without blinking. The word echoed. Mom, so easily said, so instinctively directed at someone else. She wondered how often that had happened. How many times Ava had been called Mom without correcting anyone. How many nurses, doctors, receptionists had assumed things based on what they saw who held the baby first, who signed the forms, who lay in the hospital bed. Emily hadn't held her daughter until nearly 2 hours after the birth. Nathan had texted her to say the baby was fine, that things were moving fast, that the staff needed time to stabilize everything. When she was finally let in, Ava had been propped up on pillows, the baby in her arms, and Nathan standing beside. The bed no one had introduced Emily. No one had asked her if she wanted to hold the baby. She had stood there, awkward, her hands half-raised, until Ava looked over and offered her the bundle as if passing off something borrowed. And now, even the nurses didn't know who she was. She stood up slowly and walked back to the basket, resting her hand lightly on the edge. The baby stirred, her lips parting in a soft breath. "I'm your mother," Emily whispered, the words barely audible, even if no one remembers to say it. The night after they returned home from the hospital, the house was quieter than it had ever been. The baby slept in the small bassinet beside Emily's bed, her soft breaths barely audible under the gentle whir of the white noise machine. Nathan was in the shower, the door closed. Steam curling from beneath it like mist escaping. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers drumming softly against her leg. She should have been sleeping. Exhaustion pressed down on her, but something in her refused to let go. A restlessness had settled deep in her chest. She couldn't shake the nurse's voice from earlier that afternoon, the way she'd said Mom without hesitation. Nor could she forget how Nathan had shrugged when she'd asked again about the missing. "Legal paperwork. I'll follow up with the lawyer," he'd said. "It probably just got buried. Don't stress." But she was starting to feel like stress was the only rational response. Too many things weren't lining up. Emily reached for her phone. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, Just ... clarity. Some kind of proof that she hadn't imagined the shift over the past few months. She opened the Cloud Sync folder Nathan had set up a year ago when they'd been reorganizing their digital files. Just in case, he'd said. If I lose my phone, or something happens, we have backups. The sync had run recently. 2 days before the birth, her heart beat faster. She found the folder marked Messages and tapped it open. Text chains sorted by name. She scrolled until she saw Ava M. She tapped dot at first. The messages were what she expected. Short check-ins, appointment reminders, updates on how Ava was feeling. But then, further down, she saw the tone change. It was subtle at first. A heart emoji after a thank you. Then a joke. Then a private photo of Ava's growing belly knot, one she had shared with Emily. Not one from the clinic, but a mirror selfie, taken in soft light. Ava's hand resting lightly on her bump. Little Bean is kicking this morning, Ava had written. Nathan had replied, I wish I was there to feel it. Emily scrolled further. The dates stretched back months. Private messages sent late at night. Around the same time, he told Emily he was working late or staying out with colleagues. Ava talking about dreams she'd had where Nathan held the baby first. Nathan saying things like, we're already a family, the three of us. Emily's fingers trembled as she kept reading. Messages laced with affection, familiarity, and eventually something deeper. Ava had sent a voice memo at one point. Emily hesitated, then tapped it. Ava's voice played softly through the phone speaker. I know this is messy, she said, but I keep thinking, maybe this was how it was meant to happen. Maybe we were meant to raise this baby together, not as some formal arrangement, but something real. Emily froze. Nathan's written response had followed within minutes. Let's take it one step at a time. She doesn't need to know everything, not yet. Emily dropped the phone into her lap. The room was spinning. It wasn't just a matter of poor communication or misfiled documents. This had been deliberate, planned, layered in omission and soft betrayals. They hadn't just excluded her from paperwork or hospital access, they had been building something behind her back. Slowly, quietly, carefully, the baby stirred beside her. A soft hiccup escaping her lips. Emily turned to look. In the faint glow from the hallway, she could see the outline of her daughter's face. So small, so unaware. A sudden wave of cold swept through her. Nathan stepped out of the bathroom moments later, toweling his hair. He smiled, as if the past few days had been difficult but manageable. He asked. Emily didn't answer. She was staring at him, but it was like seeing him for the first time. Not the husband she'd leaned on during years of heartbreak. Not the man who had whispered hope into her ear when they thought they had lost. Everything but someone else entirely. Someone who had rewritten the story and removed her from it. The baby was asleep in the nursery, swaddled in soft muslin and surrounded by the quiet hum of the sound machine. Emily stood just outside the door, her hand on the frame, listening to the soft pattern of her daughter's breathing. It was one of the few moments of peace she'd had all day, between feeding schedules, checkup calls, and the never-ending weight of unanswered questions. She'd been stretched thin. She hadn't spoken to Nathan about the messages. Not yet. She'd tried to make sense of them on her own first, to process the truth before confronting him with it, but nothing she read made sense. Every time she thought she had reached the bottom of it, another layer opened, another omission, another small betrayal. She turned to head downstairs, planning to warm a bottle and maybe steal a moment alone in the kitchen. But halfway down the staircase, she stopped. Nathan's voice. He was in the dining room, his tone low, but agitated. She couldn't see him yet, only hear the rhythm of his words through the half-closed pocket door. No, I told you, it's fine. Everything's under control, he was saying. Then a pause. She hasn't figured it out. Not completely. Emily froze. There was silence, then a shift in his tone, sharper now. Defensive. She's not even the biological mother. Legally, there's nothing she can claim. No signature, no name on the birth record. It was never hers to begin with. The words hit her like a slap. Not even the biological mother. Her mouth went dry. The wall beside her felt suddenly too close, the floor too far away. She stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, pressing herself against the corner, trying to steady her breath. Nathan continued, unaware. Look, the important thing is that Ava and I are in agreement. The paperwork might be a mess, but the intent is clear. She's the one who gave birth. I'm the father, Emily was. Supportive, but that doesn't give her legal standing. Another pause, a faint chuckle. I know, but she's emotional. I'm handling it. Emily didn't realize she was holding her breath until her chest began to ache. He was talking about her like she was a problem to be managed, like she was an obstacle, not a partner, not the woman who had spent years hoping, grieving, praying for this child, not the woman who had endured every appointment, every injection, every consultation, just someone who had been present but not essential. She turned slowly and climbed the stairs again, her hand gripping the railing tightly to keep her balance. Each step felt heavier than the last dot in the nursery. The baby stirred slightly, then settled again. Emily stood over the crib, staring down at her daughter's face, not the biological mother. It echoed again, louder now. Bouncing between the corners of her mind, she thought about the egg retrieval, the months of hormone shots, the weeks they'd spent preparing the embryos. She thought about how Nathan had handled all the paperwork, how she'd trusted him when he said everything was in place. She remembered the fertility specialist saying both their names would be linked to the embryo, that they'd be co-listed on the record. But she had never seen the final form, and now Nathan had made it clear there. It had never been submitted, or it had been altered, and Emily had been erased before the baby was even born. She sat down slowly in the rocker beside the crib. Her hands shook as she reached for the small blanket folded across her lap. She wrapped it around herself, breathing in the faint scent of the baby's skin powder milk, and something soft and new. It didn't matter what. Nathan said on the phone she had made room for this child in her heart before there was even a heartbeat, and no one could tell her she didn't belong. Emily stood at the kitchen sink, hands submerged in lukewarm water, a baby bottle soaking beneath her fingertips. The morning sun filtered through the window, casting soft lines across the countertop. The house was still, too still. Nathan had left early to run errands, though he hadn't said where. He hadn't said much at all lately. Not since the hospital. Not since the birth certificate. Not since she heard him whispering into the phone that she wasn't the baby's biological mother. She hadn't confronted him about that night directly. Not yet, but the words had nested inside her, chewing through her thoughts every time she looked at her daughter. The baby stirred in the bassinet across the room. Emily dried her hands and walked over, lifting her gently. The small bundle relaxed in her arms, head settling against her shoulder, heartbeat steady against her chest. She loved this child more than she could explain, not because of genetics, not because of blood, but because of every aching moment that had led to her, every procedure, every compromise, every decision Emily had made to try again when her body couldn't. She had lived this baby's story from the beginning. She had chosen to love her before she even existed, and now she wasn't sure what part of that story was true anymore. That afternoon, Emily drove to the pediatrician's office under the pretense of a routine checkup. She held the baby close, smiled at the nurse, and answered questions softly. But when the pediatrician asked whether there were any additional concerns, she hesitated. "There's something I need," she said quietly. "Privately, if that's all right." The doctor led her to a small office in the back, walls lined with faded posters about childhood development. Emily sat down, the baby still cradled in her arms. "I'd like to request a DNA test," she said. The doctor blinked. "For the baby?" Emily nodded. "It's complicated. I'm not asking because I doubt the surrogacy. I'm asking because I need to be sure of something." The doctor didn't press. She explained the process, the confidentiality involved. Emily signed the consent forms, provided her own sample, and let the nurse swab the inside of the baby's cheek. It wasn't until she was back in the car that her hands began to shake. This wasn't about proving she was the mother. She knew that bond couldn't be measured by biology. This was about Nathan, about the growing suspicion that the truth had been rewritten behind her back, that the embryo transfer they'd agreed tooth the one using her egg might never have been the embryo that made it to Avidot. The test would take a few days. Each day stretched into the next, taut with silence and suspicion. Nathan asked if she was okay. She said she was tired. He didn't ask again. When the envelope arrived, Emily opened it alone. She didn't sit down. She stood in the hallway, the baby monitor buzzing faintly behind her, and unfolded the lab report. With hands that refused to be steady, The baby's DNA did not match hers. Not partially. Not at all. No biological relation. She stood there for a long time, staring at the numbers, the summary, the percentages that spelled out in clinical language what Nathan had kept from her for months. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a error. This child was Nathan's, but not hers. Ava hadn't been just a surrogate. She had been the biological mother all along. Emily lowered the paper to her side and walked quietly to the nursery. The baby lay sleeping in the bassinet, one tiny hand curled near her chin. Emily knelt beside her. "You are still mine," she whispered. But as she stood up again, something hardened in her chest. She had trusted Nathan with everything, with the embryo, the process, the legality, the promise, and he had given her a story. Now it was time for the truth. Emily opened the front door to find Ava standing on the porch, hands tucked deep into the pockets of her coat, her hair damp from the soft mist that had fallen over the neighborhood all afternoon. She hadn't called ahead, hadn't texted, just showed up like a shadow that had finally caught up. Emily didn't say anything. She stepped aside. Ava entered slowly, her gaze sweeping across the hallway like she was seeing it for the first time. The house was quiet. The baby was napping upstairs. Nathan wasn't home. That was probably intentional. "I only have a few minutes," Ava said softly, her voice small, hesitant. "I didn't know if you'd even let me in." Emily shut the door behind her and crossed her arms. "You're here. Say what you came to say." Ava looked down at the floor, her shoulders hunched like someone carrying something too heavy. I never meant for any of this to happen like it did." "You never meant for what?" Emily asked, her voice cold. "To get pregnant with your own child and pretend she was mine. To let me think this was surrogacy when it was something else entirely." Ava winced. "I didn't know how to stop it once it started." "That's not an answer." They stood in the foyer for a long moment, the silence so thick it could choke. Finally, Ava looked up, her eyes red, swollen. "It started with the embryo," she said. "The clinic called and said the one you'd chosen hadn't survived the thaw. Nathan didn't tell you because he didn't want you to lose hope," he said. "We could try again later, but he didn't want to tell you right then." Emily's heart pounded. "Then what?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Ava hesitated. "He told me we could use my egg, just as a backup. That it was temporary. That we'd fix it later. That you'd never have to know." Emily stepped back slightly, her hand gripping the edge of the banister. "He made that decision without me." Ava nodded. "And you went along with it." "I was scared," she whispered. "He made it sound like it was already falling apart. He said you were overwhelmed, that you might back out if we didn't keep things moving." Emily stared at her. "And when you got pregnant? When it worked, you still didn't tell me?" "I didn't know how," Ava said, her voice cracking. "I kept thinking we'd come clean, that he'd fix the paperwork, that he'd make things right before the baby came." Emily's eyes filled, but her face didn't change, but he didn't. Ava shook her head. "And you just watched me decorate a nursery, wash onesies, pick out names I know," Ava said, "and I hated myself for it every day." Emily turned away, walking to the living room window, arms wrapped tightly around herself. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the floor. "I held her in the hospital," Emily said quietly. "She was already 2 hours old. I didn't even know she'd been born. You and Nathan were the first people she saw." Ava was silent. "I thought I was her mother," Emily continued. "I fought for that role. I protected that space in my heart, and you both of you treated me like a placeholder." "No," Ava said quickly. "I didn't think of you that way. I swear I didn't. You were the only reason I agreed to any of this. I believed in what you were trying to do. I still do, but I let it get too far. I let him convince me." Emily turned back. "Why are you here now?" Ava swallowed. "Because I think he's planning something else, something that shuts you out completely. He mentioned lawyers. Papers I've never seen," he said. "The less you know, the safer the agreement." Emily's throat tightened. "You think he's trying to take her from me?" "I think he already has a plan for how this ends," Ava said, "and I don't want to be part of it anymore." They stood in silence again, the weight of the truth filling the room. "You have to choose," Emily said at last. "Right now, are you standing with him or with me?" Ava didn't hesitate. "I'm with her." The folder had been sitting on the top shelf of the hallway cabinet, tucked behind old tax forms, manuals for appliances they no longer owned, and a few warranty cards. Emily had looked there dozens of times for other things, but today she had purpose. She climbed the step stool and reached deep into the back, her hand brushing across smooth paper and plastic until she felt the burgundy folder. Nathan had said contained everything: the medical records, the transfer forms, the surrogacy agreement. She brought it down and set it on the dining table. The baby monitor sat nearby, silent for now, the screen glowing dimly. Emily opened the folder. Inside were scattered pages, some from the clinic, a few appointment summaries with Ava's name and Emily's listed as intended mother, a copy of the embryo receipt with a date circled. But as she flipped further, her fingers slowed. There were no signed legal forms, no notarized declarations, no pre-birth parentage petition, no contract, nothing binding. She pulled the rest of the pages free, laying them flat across the table. She recognized the intake paperwork from the reproductive clinic. She saw the screening form for Ava's hormone levels. But where was the agreement, the one Nathan had promised to handle? The one they'd both discussed at the start? The one he said he was finalizing with a lawyer back in the second trimester? She remembered asking him about it again in Ava's 7th month while they were setting up the nursery. He was assembling the crib and she was folding tiny onesies. She had asked, gently, if everything had been filed. He'd said, "Yeah, it's all good, just waiting on Ava's final signature." Emily had believed him. Why wouldn't she? She stared down at the paperwork now, heart pounding. If there had ever been a document, it wasn't here. If it had been filed, there would be a copy. But this folder was a pile of drafts, unsigned, unofficial. None of it would hold up in court. None of it recognized her as a legal parent. She sank into the chair, her hand gripping the edge of the table. There had never been a contract. The realization settled in slowly like cold water leaking into a warm room. Without a formal agreement, Ava was not just a surrogate. She was the legal mother, and Nathan, the biological father, held all remaining rights by default. Emily, who had been in the room for every consultation, who had chosen the paint for the nursery, who had arranged Ava's prenatal vitamins on the kitchen counter each week, she had no legal claim at all. She grabbed her phone and opened her emails. She searched for anything in communication with the attorney Nathan had supposedly hired. She typed surrogacy, agreement, contract, lawyer, parentage, nothing. She checked texts, scrolled back. The last mention was from February, Nathan, saying he was looped in with the legal side and not to worry. He had kept her out of the loop, on purpose. Her jaw tightened. If he had deliberately avoided filing a contract, then everything had been a setup, a way to move forward without tying himself or Ava to her, a way to create a child with no trace of Emily on paper. She thought of the nurse in the hospital, how casually she'd said mom when referring to Ava. She thought of the missing birth certificate, of Ava's visit, of the DNA test that proved the child wasn't biologically hers. All of it pointed to one simple fact. Nathan had never intended for Emily to be the mother. He had given her a role to play, had let her believe she was part of something sacred. And when it was over, when the baby was born, he had the paperwork, ready, or rather, not ready, so that she could be erased without conflict. The baby monitor crackled softly. Emily stood, her hand steady now, her mind clearer than it had been in weeks. She didn't need Nathan to confirm it anymore. The silence in that folder said everything. Emily hadn't thought about the baby shower in weeks. It had felt like a happy blur at the time, balloons in soft, neutral tones. A cake shaped like a cloud, friends laughing around a pile of tiny wrapped gifts. But now, as she stood in the nursery folding a pair of soft cotton socks, the memory resurfaced without warning. And this time, it brought different details with it. It had been a warm afternoon in late April. Emily's best friend Lauren had planned everything: a backyard, set up with canopies, lemonade in glass pitchers, platters of food on floral tablecloths. There had been a chair decorated in ribbons for Emily to sit in while opening gifts, and pastel banners strung across the fence spelling out welcome. Little one. Ava had been seated near the center of the group, smiling, her hand resting on her round belly. She wore a white dress with small blue flowers and her hair had been done with more care than usual. Everyone had commented on how beautiful she looked, and she did. Emily remembered feeling grateful in that moment, grateful that Ava was carrying their child, grateful that they had been able to find someone they trusted. She remembered watching her from across the yard and thinking how lucky they were to have a friend willing to do something so profound. But now, as she looked back, she realized something else. Ava had been the center of attention. People had gravitated toward her not just out of kindness, but out of assumption. The conversations drifted toward her experience, her comfort, her journey. A few guests had asked Emily polite questions about nursery prep or baby names, but they asked Ava how she was sleeping, if she felt movement, if she was nervous. And Ava hadn't corrected them. She hadn't redirected a single question. When one of Nathan's coworkers said, "Wow, carrying a child for someone else, I could never do it," Ava had just smiled and shrugged, as if it wasn't a big deal. She hadn't said, "I'm doing it for Emily and Nathan." She hadn't even said Emily's name. Emily remembered brushing it off at the time. She didn't want to be sensitive. It was Ava's body, Ava's health on the line. It made sense that people would focus on her. But now, in the quiet of the nursery, she couldn't help but question that memory. Then there was Nathan. He had been attentive, yes, but in a particular way. He had fetched Ava's water, made her a plate, adjusted her seat when the sun got too hot. When Ava needed help up the patio stairs, he'd held her elbow with both hands. His touch lingering a little longer than it should have, Emily remembered Lauren giving her a sideways glance at one point. Emily had just laughed. "He's just being helpful," she'd whispered. Lauren hadn't looked convinced. Later, when they were opening gifts, Ava had sat beside Nathan on the couch while Emily unwrapped onesies and bottles. At one point, a guest handed Ava a gift addressed to baby. Monroe Ava had paused and said, "Oh, I think this one's for you, Em." But she didn't pass it over right away. She opened the card herself, read it, then handed it over. Already opened. Emily had forgotten that moment until now. Forgotten. How strange it had felt. The whole afternoon had been framed around Emily, but the gravity of the event had shifted. People had smiled at her, but they had watched Ava. Nathan had hovered near Ava more than he had near Emily. And now, knowing what she knew about the embryo, the lack of contract, the text messages, it was impossible to unsee it. They had been whispering for months, just not with their mouths. Emily sat in the rocker, the socks forgotten in her lap. That day hadn't been a celebration. It had been a soft transition, a quiet exchange of roles, masked in politeness and pastel decorations. She just hadn't realized she'd already been written out. Emily hadn't meant to snoop. She told herself that over and over as she sat in the study, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the drawer handle. But snooping implied suspicion. This was something else. She already knew. She was no longer searching for a feeling. She was searching for proof. Something that would confirm what had been hiding in plain sight. Nathan's home office had always been off limits, in a casual sort of way. Not locked, not forbidden, just his space. He kept it tidy, structured. Bills and folders, receipts sorted, drawers labeled with crisp tabs. It was easy to assume there would be nothing secret in a place so organized, but Emily had noticed the change. The way he shifted papers quickly when she entered. The way he no longer left his desk drawers ajar. The way he avoided that room entirely when she was home that morning. With Nathan out at a supposed client meeting and the baby asleep upstairs, Emily stepped into the study. Her heartbeat was steady, but her chest felt tight. She moved carefully, not rummaging, just reading, just confirming. Most of what she found was harmless. Utility bills, insurance forms, a file marked house repairs, another labeled baby receipts, filled with itemized orders for diapers, bottles, crib parts. But then, tucked beneath a set of envelopes marked medical, she found one. That didn't belong. It wasn't labeled. Just a plain white envelope, slightly curled at the corners. She pulled it out and turned it over. No name on the front. Just weight. Just silence. She opened it slowly. Inside was a glossy black and white ultrasound photo, the kind they hand you at a first trimester scan. Her breath caught when she saw the outline of a fetus, unmistakable, curled in profile with a hand near its face. The tiny text in the corner showed the date. 9 months ago, around the time Ava had announced she was pregnant, but the name in the upper left corner was what pulled the air from Emily's lungs. Ava Martinez. Patient, not Emily, not her name listed. As intended mother, not a note about gestational surrogacy. Just Ava, alone. She stared at it for a long time, in all their appointments together. Emily had never seen this particular image. They'd gone to shared ultrasounds at the clinic, later scans at the OB/GYN's office. Every photo she'd been given had her name or the word surrogacy printed beside. Ava's, but not this one. This one was personal, unshared. A moment captured just between two people. Emily flipped the photo, over an faint pen on the back. Written in Nathan's unmistakable handwriting were the words, "First glimpse. Our girl." She dropped it onto the desk. Her fingers went numb. He had been there at that appointment, an early scan, before the whole thing became a shared process. He had gone alone with Ava, and he had called the baby theirs. Emily sat down. Hard in the desk chair, the edges of the room blurring at the corners. It wasn't just about deception anymore. This was premeditated. This photo was from a time when Nathan had still been assuring Emily that everything was in motion, that the transfer would happen soon. That Ava was preparing, he had lied. The embryo they'd planned to use Millie's egg, Nathan's sperm, had never made it to the procedure. Ava had become pregnant with her own child, and Nathan had known this. Photo proved it. He hadn't stumbled into a mistake. He had planned it from the beginning. And then, for months, he had let Emily live inside a story that wasn't real, buying clothes, dreaming of names, planning nursery colors for a baby she'd never biologically made. She picked up the photo again. The baby's outline was small, blurred in places, but unmistakably human. Emily didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, staring at that name in the corner of his name, knowing exactly how much had been stolen. Not just a child, but every moment, she thought, she'd shared. Emily stared at the clinic's hold music, blaring softly through the phone speaker. Her thumb hovered over the red end call button more than once. It wasn't the first time she had called, but it was the first time she was ready to ask the real question. Not about timelines, not about invoices, but about the embryo, one she had believed would become her daughter. When the receptionist answered and transferred her to patient records, Emily introduced herself calmly, politely. She gave her name, birth date, and Nathan's information when asked. Her voice was steady, but her mind was already circling the edge of something she couldn't define. "I was hoping to get clarification on the status of our embryos," she said. There was a pause on the other end, clicking keys. Then the woman spoke again. "Yes, I see your file. You and Mr. Monroe underwent retrieval and fertilization a little over a year ago. 3 viable embryos were created and frozen." "Right?" Emily said. "That's what I remember. But I never got confirmation about the embryo transfer. I was told by my husband that it happened. Could you verify if and when that occurred?" "Of course," the woman replied. Another pause, longer this time. "According to our records, 1 embryo was thawed for transfer, but the notes here say the procedure was canceled the morning of." It lists a call from Mr. Monroe stating the surrogate had an unexpected health issue and the transfer was postponed. Emily's stomach tightened. So the embryo wasn't implanted? "No, ma'am, unfortunately." Once thawed, it became non-viable within the 24-hour window. That embryo was marked as discarded the following day. Emily closed her eyes, and the other 2. There was more typing. "It looks like the other 2 embryos are still stored on-site. They've been kept under standard preservation. Would you like us to send over a verification statement for your records?" Emily could barely breathe. "Yes, please. Email and hard copy." "Absolutely. I'll process that today." She hung up without saying goodbye. The room was silent, except for the baby monitor across the table. Her daughter, no Ava's daughter, was napping upstairs. Emily pressed her palms flat on the table, her body perfectly still. The embryo hadn't been transferred. Nathan had told her it had. He had looked her in the eye and told her the procedure went smoothly. That Ava was just feeling tired. That the doctor had said everything looked promising. That it was their baby growing inside her. It had all been a lie. The embryo they had chosen together, the one she had imagined becoming their child, had never even left the lab. It had been thawed and left to perish because Nathan had canceled the transfer. Ava had never carried that embryo. She had carried a child created outside the clinic, outside any agreement, outside Emily entirely. Emily stood up and paced the length of the kitchen. The timeline made sickening sense now. Nathan had known their embryo wouldn't be used. He'd planned for it, had probably never intended for it to be used in the first place. By the time he called the clinic to cancel the transfer, Ava may have already been pregnant with her own egg, with Nathan's sperm. The idea that he had watched their embryo die while planning a child with someone else made her legs weak. And worse, he had done it quietly. Without her knowledge, without her consent. The destruction of that embryo was not a tragic accident. It was part of the plan. She looked back at her phone. The woman at the clinic had offered to send a verification. Emily would have it in writing, proof that what Nathan said had never happened. Proof that their child had never been born. She walked slowly to the fridge and pulled down the list they had made together 9 months ago. Names, girl and boy. Scribbled in her handwriting with tiny stars next to the ones they both liked, she pulled it from the magnet and folded it in half. There had been a child, but not the one she had imagined, and certainly not the one Nathan had promised. Emily sat on the living room floor, surrounded by a mess of opened folders, envelopes, and receipts. The baby napped upstairs, and Nathan was out again this time, with no clear explanation. He had said something vague about getting groceries, but he'd already brought home a full bag that morning. Lately, everything he said seemed like a placeholder, something to fill the space where truth used to live. She had started digging that afternoon with one goal in mind, to see if there was anything else he hadn't told her. The discovery of the discarded embryo had left a fracture deep in her trust, but the cracks hadn't stopped spreading. She needed facts, something measurable, something that couldn't lie. She began with the joint accounts, nothing unusual. Mortgage payments, utilities, purchases from baby stores, a few online orders for diapers and formula. Then she found a manila envelope marked tax savings, which didn't seem to match anything she remembered. Inside were 3 months of printed bank statements from an account she had never seen before. It wasn't under both their names, just Nathan's. She sat up straighter. The statements came from a small credit union across town, a place they had never used together. She scanned the header. Nathan S. Monroe, primary account holder. The deposits weren't what surprised her. He received consulting income from time to time, and the numbers roughly matched what he claimed. But it was the outgoing transfers that made her blood run cold each month. Sometimes twice, there was a payment listed simply as transfer to a Martinez. The amounts weren't small, $1,500 one month, $2,000 another. In one case, nearly $3,500, there were no notes, no memos, no attached invoices, just Ava's name and the quiet regularity of someone being paid on the side. Emily flipped through the pages again, heart pounding. The payments had started shortly before Ava announced her pregnancy. Not after, not as reimbursement for food or travel, but before, and they continued through the pregnancy. Every single month, Emily checked the dates. The first transfer had been made 3 days after the embryo had been thawed and marked discarded. She knew the exact day now, having received confirmation from the clinic in writing. The timing was too close to be coincidence. She pushed the papers aside and grabbed her phone. Her fingers hovered over Ava's number, but she didn't call. Not yet. Instead, she opened her own banking app and searched for any transfers to Ava. Nothing. Every reimbursement, every expense tied to the surrogacy had gone through Emily directly. Gas money, prenatal vitamins, groceries, and all of it had been documented in her records. But this separate account had operated in the shadows. She printed the statements as she watched the pages feed out of the printer. One after another, she felt the weight of what she was holding. Nathan hadn't just lied about the embryo, the contract, or the DNA. He had financially supported Ava through a pregnancy. He orchestrated and concealed it. From his wife, what did those payments mean? Were they hush money, gifts, incentives to keep Ava from backing out? Or were they simply the cost of building a life without Emily in it? She thought back to the day Ava moved in during the 3rd trimester. Nathan had insisted it was for convenience easier to monitor her health, ensure she was comfortable, reduce stress. But maybe that wasn't it at all. Maybe it was about control, about proximity, about hiding something in plain sight. The house had become a stage, and Emily was the only one who didn't know she was acting. She picked up one of the statements again and studied the bold line near the bottom. Transferred to a Martinez. $2,750. The payment had been made 2 weeks before the baby was born. 2 weeks before Emily rushed to the hospital, thinking she was becoming a mother, she folded the paper and slid it into a new folder marked evidence. If Nathan had built this lie one transaction at a time, she would unravel it the same way, one truth at a time. The office number rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, calm and professional. Miller and Associates. How can I help you today? Emily's throat tightened, but she forced her voice to stay even. Hi, I'm trying to follow up on a case that was supposed to be handled by your office. It involves a surrogacy arrangement. My husband, Nathan Monroe, said he retained your services last year. The woman paused. Let me transfer you to Mr. Miller's assistant. One moment. There was a click, then hold music soft, forgettable piano melodies that only made the silence in Emily's mind louder. She stood by the kitchen window, watching a bird land on the fence outside. The baby was asleep upstairs. Inhaled slowly. Yes, Mr. Miller. My name is Emily Monroe. I'm following up on a surrogacy contract I believed was being drafted by your office last year. My husband told me he was working with you directly. There was a pause. Then Monroe, yes, I remember speaking with Mr. Monroe. Give me a moment. More silence. Surrogacy agreement. But it looks like it was never finalized. Looks like we had one phone consultation, and we sent over a draft template. That was in April. After that, I followed up twice. Didn't hear back. I assumed they decided to go with a different firm or not move forward. Emily gripped the edge of the counter. Nathan indicated that he was working with a friend of the family as the surrogate. He mentioned wanting to keep it informal until later in the pregnancy. Voice dropped. No, we sent him a standard draft agreement and a checklist of required information. It was never returned. She closed her eyes. Was he ever billed for services? No, we didn't get far enough to invoice. There's a note here that says client verbally confirmed intent to delay until further notice. That was the last contact. Emily swallowed hard. Thank you. I'm sorry it wasn't what you were expecting, he said gently. She ended the call, her hand trembling slightly as she placed the phone on the table. Nathan had lied again, not just in passing, not just through omission. He had looked her in the eye and said that the legal process was underway, that the attorney was just waiting on Ava's signature, that everything would be squared away before the baby arrived. But there had never been a process, no instructions, no communication involving Emily. Just a single phone call to a law firm and a template that was never filled in. She opened her laptop and searched her email inbox for any message from Miller and Associates. There was nothing, not even in spam. If she hadn't made that call herself, she never would have known. And maybe that had been Nathan's plan all along. Say just enough to sound reassuring. Smile when asked about paperwork, and promise that everything was in the system. But nothing had ever been filed. No court had recognized her as a mother. No legal protections had been put in place. And now she stood in a house where the baby upstairs bore no official connection to her at all. She clicked open a blank document on her. The first line she typed was, "The lawyer never filed the agreement." She stared at it for a long time, then typed the second line. The knock came just after sunset. Emily opened the front door to find Ava standing there, alone, arms crossed tightly across her chest. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was pulled back messily, and her eyes were puffy either from crying or lack of sleep, maybe both. She looked nothing like the confident, glowing woman who had once stood in that same spot. "Can I come in?" Emily hesitated only for a second, then stepped aside. Ava walked into the living room and stood silently, as if trying to decide whether to sit or run. The air was heavy between them. Emily didn't speak. She folded her arms, waiting. "I shouldn't be here," Ava started, "but I can't take it anymore." Emily said nothing. Ava's fingers twitched at her sides. "He told me not to talk to you. He said that a lot." Ava's mouth opened, then closed. Her voice cracked. "I need to tell you the truth." Ava's eyes flicked toward it, then back to Emily. "It wasn't just surrogacy," Ava said quietly. Emily didn't react, not outwardly. She'd known for a while now, but the words still landed with weight. Ava's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I really didn't. It started small texts, late-night talks. At first I thought we were just getting close because of the baby. It was supposed to be yours. But then she swallowed. One night, it went too far. And after that, it kept going. He said he was confused. Said he still loved you. But that what we had was different. Said this child would bring us all closer together. That maybe it would. I don't know. Redefine things. Him, and then got pregnant and decided to pretend it was mine. No. Ava stepped forward. I mean, yes, but I didn't decide that it would break you if you knew that you wanted a baby so badly. It wouldn't matter where it came from. Emily flinched. I didn't want to lie, Ava whispered. But once it started, I didn't know how to stop. Every day I waited for him to tell you. Emily finally spoke. He never planned to tell me. Ava broke down then. She sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. I thought he would. But after she was born, he just acted like it was done. She asked. Ava looked up, tears running down her cheeks. Because I see what he's doing to you? Because I hear how he talks about you when you're not around. And because I look at that baby, and I can't keep pretending she's not yours too. Maybe not in blood, but you're the one who painted her room. You're the one who bought her first blanket. You're the one who loved her before she existed. Emily said nothing. The words twisted inside her like a blade. I'm sorry, Ava said softly. Emily stood. Sorry doesn't fix it. Ava nodded, rising slowly to leave. As the door closed behind her, Emily walked to the base of the stairs and looked up. The monitor on the table flickered, showing the sleeping child. The hospital administrator had hesitated when Emily first made the request. It's not common, he'd said, fingers steepled over the keyboard. But given that you're listed as a party to the care and there's no legal restriction. She had nodded politely, keeping her face composed, her voice measured. Inside, her stomach had already begun to churn. She hadn't been in the room when her daughter was born. Nathan had told her she arrived too late, that things had moved quickly, that Ava had gone into active labor sooner than expected, and by the time he called, they were already in the thick of it. She had believed him. She'd clutched the story like a lifeline till everything else had begun unraveling. Now, she had the USB stick in her hand, just a simple black drive. It felt heavy in her palm. Back home, she sat down at her computer. She hesitated for a long moment before clicking the file. The timestamp in the corner began 37 minutes before the birth. A wide-angle view of the delivery suite, sterile and clinical. Ava was already in bed, her face contorted in pain, frame, checking monitors, adjusting IV. At first it felt impersonal, watching it all like a distant observer. Then Nathan walked into frame. Emily leaned closer to the screen. He didn't look rushed. There was no sign of panic or urgency. He strolled in, holding a paper cup of coffee, and handed it to one of the nurses with a joke. Ava turned to him, clearly in discomfort, but her face lit up when she saw him. He went to her side and without hesitation took her hand. Not held it as one might hold a friend's out of obligation. Rubbed small circles into her palm with his thumb. Emily pressed pause. She blinked, stared at the screen, then pressed play again. The camera caught everything in eerie silence. They leaned toward each other. At one point, he kissed her forehead. The nurse returned and asked a question. Ava nodded. The process had begun. Monitors beeped. Nurses moved with precision. Nathan didn't move away. Emily kept watching. There was no sign of him reaching for his phone. No indication he had called anyone, least of all her. He was focused on Ava, attentive, encouraging for the next 20 minutes. He stayed glued to her side, speaking words Emily couldn't hear but could imagine. His hand never left hers. And then the moment came. The baby arrived in a blur of motion and towels. Ava collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted, and the nurse lifted the newborn gently into waiting arms. Emily watched as Nathan took the baby first. He didn't hesitate. He didn't glance around the room, looking for Emily. He didn't ask for her to be brought in. Instead, he rocked the baby in his arms, tears running down his face, and kissed her tiny forehead before passing her back to Ava. They looked at each other, this quiet little trio, as if no one else existed. Emily sat frozen in front of the screen. She didn't remember opening her mouth, but now her breathing was audible. Tight. She reached out and paused the video again in the corner of the screen. The timestamp showed 8:46, She had arrived at the hospital at 9:03. 17 minutes too late because no one had called her. Because Nathan hadn't wanted her there, this wasn't an oversight, it was a choice. A birth she had waited for, planned for, dreamt of, played out without her, behind closed doors. And Nathan had been there not as a supportive husband overseeing a surrogate birth, but as a father beside his partner. Emily pulled out the USB stick and set it on the table. No one had told her the truth, but now she had seen it for herself. In sterile lighting, in digital silence, captured frame by frame. The family that had formed that day didn't include her. Emily stood in line at the records office, clutching the small slip of paper in her hand. It was a formality, she had told herself, just a copy of the birth certificate, something she should have had weeks ago, but Nathan had said he'd already filed everything. She only wanted it for their files, for the pediatrician, for clarity. That's what she told herself as the line inched forward. That's what she kept repeating like a chant in her head. When she reached the counter, the woman behind the glass took her form, an ID-1 certified copy of the birth certificate. She confirmed. Emily nodded. The woman tapped on her keyboard, then printed a single sheet and passed it through the slot. Here you go. Let us know if anything looks off. Emily stepped aside, unfolded the certificate slowly, and scanned it line by line. Her eyes moved past the date of birth, the hospital, the mother's section blank, and finally to the line that made her blood run cold. Child's name, Ela Grace Martinez Monroe Martinez. Grace hadn't been on the list. Ela hadn't been one of the names Emily and Nathan had circled in their notebook. And Martinez Eva's surname had never once been mentioned in the conversations they'd had about their future daughter's name. Emily had imagined so many versions of this document in her mind, but not this one. She checked again. It wasn't a typo. It was printed cleanly, officially sealed, with the county emblem in the lower corner. A valid legal record. Her own name was nowhere on it, not under mother, not under informant, not as a witness. She turned back to the window, throat tight. "Excuse me," she said, "there must be a mistake." The woman frowned, took the paper, and scanned her screen. "I don't see an amended version here. This is the only one on file. The original and current." "Can you tell me who filed it?" Emily asked. Voice dry. The woman clicked again. "Looks like the father, Nathan Monroe, and Ava Martinez, both signed electronically." Emily stared at her. "Sorry, is there a reason the mother's section is blank?" The woman gave a rehearsed shrug. "Could be surrogacy, could be a pending court order, could be they just haven't filed an amendment yet. That's between the parties. We process what we're given." Emily thanked her without hearing her own voice and walked outside with the paper clutched tight in her hand. She sat in her car and read it again. Adult Ela Grace. She remembered suggesting the name Clara. Nathan had liked Sophie. They'd compromised on Lena, then laughed about how no one in the family liked any of their picks, but not once had he mentioned Ela. Not once had Ava been part of that conversation. It was as if those months of planning didn't exist, as if they'd named a stranger's baby, she texted. "Nathan, why does the birth certificate list a name I didn't choose?" The dots blinked for a long time. Then a reply, "We had to move quickly. The hospital needed a name right away." "You weren't there." Emily stared at the message. "And Ava's last name," she typed back. Another pause. It made sense at the time. "She's the biological mother. I didn't want legal issues down the line." Emily didn't respond. Not right away. She stared at the document again, and this time it felt like a final door had quietly shut. Whatever fantasy she had clung to that this child had been intended for her, that the chaos was just confusion, that Nathan had made bad decisions under pressure. It all fractured at that name, the name sealed in print, filed by two people she no longer trusted, the name of a child she had loved before she had even existed, the name she hadn't chosen. When Rachel arrived, she didn't ask questions. She walked through the door with 2 suitcases, a firm hug, and eyes that saw too much without needing to be told. Emily had sent only a short message 2 nights before. "I need help. It's bad, please come." That had been enough. The baby was asleep upstairs when Rachel stepped into the kitchen. Emily poured her tea silently. They sat across from each other at the small table where so many things had once felt like beginning's nursery plans. Ultrasound printouts. Little kicks counted late at night. Now, that table was where Emily kept a manila folder stuffed with notes, copies, and a USB drive. Rachel glanced at the papers, but didn't touch them. Start wherever you can. And so Emily did. For the first time, she said it all out loud. Not the clean version for the neighbors. Not the numb summary she had rehearsed for doctors or clerks, but the whole missiva, the deleted texts, the payments, the birth certificate, the nurse who called Ava mom, the hospital footage where Nathan never even looked at the door. Rachel listened without interrupting, except once, when Emily mentioned the changed name. That was the only time she swore. When the story was done, Rachel leaned back. "We need a paper trail," she said calmly. "Everything, every conversation, every receipt, every date. You're going to need it." Emily had already started. In pieces, a screenshot of the bank transfers, a printed email from the fertility clinic, notes scrawled on the backs of grocery lists. But it hadn't been organized. She hadn't known how. Rachel opened her laptop and created a folder. Emily versus Nathan custody and fraud. She named subfolders, legal contacts, hospital records, witness statements, financial evidence. Then she opened a spreadsheet. "We're going to list every event," she said, her voice clipped and calm. "Chronologically, what happened when, who saw it, what evidence backs it up." It was mechanical, almost clinical, but for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a sliver of control return. The list started with the day they met with Ava to ask if she would be the surrogate. Then the date Nathan claimed he contacted the lawyer. The supposed embryo transfer date, the ultrasound Ava attended alone. The first odd moment Emily had brushed off a whisper at the baby shower. Ava's discomfort when someone called Emily the mom. Each entry built a timeline. Each one chipped away at the story Nathan had tried to craft. Later that evening, Rachel dug out a blank journal from her bag and handed it to Emily. "Start writing everything you remember. Not just the facts, the feelings too. What he said, what she didn't say anything. If it ever comes down to your word versus his, you'll have something to ground it." Emily took the journal and nodded. She didn't ask where Rachel had learned to think like this. She didn't ask what made her sister move so efficiently through a life unraveling by the end of the night. They had a physical binder with labeled tabs and a shared digital drive between them. Rachel had already emailed 2 local attorneys, requesting consultations. She didn't promise an easy win, but she did promise not to leave. As they sat on the couch, the baby monitor lit up with small, soft movement. Emily reached for it instinctively. Rachel watched her, then said, "Whatever happens next, that little girl knows who's been there. That matters." Emily nodded, clutching the monitor. She had no guarantees, no name on a certificate, no contract in place, but now, finally, she wasn't facing it alone. He waited until Rachel left the house. Emily had just put the baby down and was walking back toward the kitchen when the front door creaked open without a knock. Nathan stood in the doorway, the same calm expression he always wore when he wanted to appear reasonable, like someone trying to diffuse a situation instead of the one who created it. "I figured we should talk," he said casually, closing the door behind him. Emily didn't invite him in. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed, her face unreadable. "You could have called. I thought it'd be better face to face." She said nothing. He glanced around. "Where's Rachel?" "She'll be back soon." Nathan nodded slowly. "She's always been the protective one, huh?" He smiled. A little, like it was an inside joke. Like they still shared something. Emily didn't return the smile. He shifted his weight, then walked into the living room without waiting. Sat down on the couch like it was still his home. His eyes scanned the stack of folders on the coffee table, the labeled tabs visible from where he sat. "So you're documenting things now?" he said. "I see that." Emily stayed standing. Nathan exhaled slowly. "Look, I know you're upset, and I get it. Really, I do. Things didn't go the way we said they would, but dragging this into the open isn't going to help anyone." Her jaw tightened. "Meaning? I mean, if you go to court, if you start showing people things, old texts, screenshots, whatever, you're going to turn this into a circus, and that's not going to look good for you." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you a heads up," he said, hands raised. "You think a judge is going to side with someone who's not even listed on the birth certificate? Someone who wasn't in the room when the baby was born. You want to make it about who was there and who wasn't." Emily stared at him. He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping. I know what you're trying to do, and I also know that none of it will hold up if you go public. I've already talked to a lawyer. Ava's protected. I'm protected. This won't go the way you think. You mean it won't go the way you planned? Nathan laughed under his breath. Come on, Emily. We were falling apart before any of this. You didn't want to see it. But this just sped things up. She didn't answer. I'm just saying, he continued. Think about how this looks. You're emotional. You're not even the biological mother. You think that'll play well in court or in the media? People will ask why a woman with no legal tie to the child is trying to take her. Emily's hands curled at her sides. Nathan. Noticed, I'm not saying you don't care, he added quickly. I'm saying you need to think logically now. If you want any relationship with her visitation, shared time, you need to work with me, not against me. Emily finally spoke. You had months to work with me. You chose secrecy. He stood slowly, brushing invisible lint off his sleeves. This is me trying to be fair. She moved closer, just enough to block his path to the stairs. Don't ever come into this house without permission again. Nathan stared at her for a long beat. Fine, but think about what I said. He walked to the door and opened it. Stepping out, he looked back once more. You push this too far, Emily, and it'll only make things worse for you. Then he was gone. Emily closed the door slowly, then locked it. She didn't cry. Instead, she walked to the kitchen, opened her notebook, and under the latest heading labeled Conversations, she wrote down every word he had just said. The waiting room was quiet, except for the sound of a ticking wall clock and the low hum of conversation between other clients and their attorneys. Emily sat with her hands in her lap, her fingers clasped tightly together. Rachel sat beside her, flipping through a yellow legal pad filled with notes they'd compiled over the past 2 weeks. Every document Emily had printed, every photo, every record carefully sorted, color-coded, and backed up 3 times. They were here for a consultation, not court not yet, but Emily already felt like she was on trial. The door opened and a woman in a gray suit called her name. Emily stood, legs slightly unsteady, and followed the attorney into a narrow office lined with law books and framed degrees. The attorney's name was Charlotte Healy. She was calm, measured, and direct. So you're not on the birth certificate, Charlotte said after reviewing the initial paperwork, and you were not present for the birth. There was no pre-birth order filed with the court. Emily shook her head. Nathan said he'd take care of it, I thought. Charlotte didn't react. She had likely heard that before, and there was no surrogacy contract. Emily's voice dropped. He delayed it, kept saying there was still time. Charlotte set her pen down and leaned slightly forward. Emily, I'll be honest with you. In the eyes of the law, right now, you are not considered this child's parent. No legal maternity, no listed guardianship, no established custody. I raised her, Emily said quietly. I was there every day of the pregnancy. I built her room. I went to every doctor's appointment I was allowed into. I have receipts. Photos, everything, I understand, Charlotte said. Emotionally, ethically, even socially, you're her mother. But family court doesn't operate on sentiment. It operates on paperwork, precedent, and statute. And what the documents say right now is nothing. About you. Emily swallowed hard. Here's what I can do, Charlotte continued. We can file a petition to establish parentage. It's going to require affidavits, timelines, and a full review of the circumstances. We'll need testimony from Ava, possibly DNA confirmation. And we'll need to build a compelling case that you had a legitimate expectation and active participation in parenting, despite not being the biological or legal mother. And what are the chances? Rachel asked. Charlotte hesitated. If Ava cooperates, and if we can prove that you acted as a co-parent with a clear mutual agreement, there's a path. But it's steep. The court could still determine that custody defaults to the biological parents. Emily felt the chair press hard against her back. So I could lose her. There's a risk, Charlotte said plainly. But there's also strategy. And you've already done something, smart, documenting everything. That shows consistency, investment, and care. Family court will consider the child's best interest. That includes emotional bonds, but again, it's not guaranteed. Emily sat in silence, letting the weight of the words settle in. Rachel spoke up again. What if Ava says Emily was never meant to be the mother? Charlotte looked at Emily. Then we'll need to show otherwise. Text messages, emails, witness statements, every baby gift labeled mom, every hospital record listing you as a contact. Anything that shows you were acknowledged in that role before things changed. Emily nodded. Slowly, I'll find it. Charlotte leaned back and gave a faint smile. You're not the first woman to come in with this kind of story, and you won't be the last. But if you're ready for a fight, we can fight. Outside, as they walked back to the car, Emily held her folder tighter than before. The air felt colder now. The road ahead was longer than she imagined, but at least she knew what she was walking into. The email arrived late at night. Emily had just gotten out of the shower when she saw the notification flash on her phone's subject line. Re-inquiry, delivery records. March 7th, it was from a nurse she had spoken to nearly 2 weeks earlier. One of the few who had been on shift the day of the birth. Emily had asked casually if there was any additional documentation or correspondence from that day. At the time, the nurse had said she'd check now. The forwarded email sat in her inbox. She sat on the edge of the bed, opened it, and read slowly. At first, it looked like a routine exchange. The nurse had asked another member of staff to confirm visitor permissions from that day. Emily remembered vaguely how strict the maternity wing had been about pre-approved names. She scrolled down past the headers until a familiar name caught her eye. From Ava Martinez to LND reception desk date, February 28, 9:47 a.m. Subject: visitor clarification for upcoming birth. High. Just confirming that my fiancé Nathan Monroe will be listed as my support person for labor and delivery. We've submitted the birth plan already and expect to be admitted sometime next week. Please let me know if any further documentation is needed. Ava.Emily froze. She reread the line 3 times. My fiancé Nathan Monroe, not the intended father, not partner in surrogacy, not even co-parent. Ava had written those words clearly and unambiguously, and she'd sent them a full week before she gave birth. Emily's heart began to pound. The nurse had included a short note above the forwarded message. I don't know if this helps, but I remembered she was very particular about access and her relationship with the father. This was in our records before the admission. Emily sat back in the chair. Ava hadn't slipped. She hadn't made a vague or mistaken comment during labor. She had explicitly introduced herself as Nathan's fiancée in writing before ever being admitted. That meant the story had been in motion long before Emily realized, and it had been shared with hospital staff as fact. She opened a new folder on her laptop and labeled it Hospital Email Chain. She saved the message, downloaded it as a PDF, and copied the text to her legal file. Then she pulled up a spreadsheet she and Rachel had been keeping. A timeline of key events. She added a new entry. February 28th, Ava emails LND unit, identifies herself as Nathan's fiancé, pre-admission. Then she stared at the screen. This wasn't just deception. It was premeditated. Emily thought back to the moments before the birth. Nathan saying the paperwork was just taking time, Ava claiming she didn't want a big hospital scene. The fact that Emily hadn't been called until after the baby was born, it wasn't chaos or miscommunication, it was coordinated. She checked the email header again. The address came from Ava's professional domain, the one she used for her small event planning business. It wasn't a throwaway account. It was deliberate. Emily picked up her phone and took a breath. She called Rachel. It's after midnight. Her sister answered groggily. I found something, Emily said. A nurse sent me an email. Rachel sat up. What does it say? She called herself Nathan's fiancée. To the hospital, before the birth, in writing. Rachel was quiet for a beat. So she wasn't pretending to be a surrogate anymore. No, she was pretending to be his partner. Send it to me, Rachel said quickly. We'll add it to the statement file. This could help with establishing intent, false identity, possible fraud. Emily nodded, even though no one could see her. As she hung up, the house was silent again. The baby's breathing monitor blinked softly down the hall. Emily stood, walked to the nursery, and looked in. She hadn't given birth to her. She wasn't listed on the certificate, but she had been the only one telling the truth. The external hard drive was inside a shoebox, wedged behind old tax folders in the back of the upstairs closet. Emily hadn't been looking for it. She'd been searching for a copy of the home insurance policy, trying to update her own files. Since Nathan had changed the account access, But when she pulled the box down and heard the soft clunk of something heavier than paper, she opened it. It was Nathan's old backup drive, a matte black rectangle with a worn USB cord still wrapped around it. She recognized it immediately. He used to keep it in his desk drawer, saying he didn't trust cloud storage. Years ago, before things started unraveling, Emily had watched him back up his phone and laptop to it every few months, like a ritual. Then, sometime last year, he stopped mentioning it altogether. Her hand hovered over it. She plugged it into her laptop. The drive blinked to life, with a small blue light. A folder popped up, labeled Archive, and inside it, the organization was typical Nathan. Dated folders, labeled by device. He hadn't bothered to encrypt anything. She clicked through until she found one marked pixel_5_dump. The last modified date was 7 months ago. The first thing she opened was a folder named Screenshots. There were hundreds. Many were innocuous restaurant menus, screenshots of calendar invites, random memes. But halfway down, she saw one that made her chest tighten. It was a screen capture of a text conversation with Ava.Nathan. She asked if you're still moving in. I told her it's for the baby. She bought it. Ava, are you sure she won't catch on? Nathan, she wants this too badly. She won't see it. Emily leaned back, the breath knocked out of her. She clicked the next file. Another conversation. Ava, did you delete everything? Nathan, yes. Cloud sync off. It's all on the backup, and here it was. Everything they thought had been erased. There were photos, too. Ava in their guest room, Ava in the nursery, folding clothes. One of Nathan's hand resting on her stomach. None of them had ever been shared. With Emily. Another folder labeled Docs contained a draft of a surrogacy agreement, but it wasn't filled in, no signatures. No lawyer's header. Just a Word document saved as surrogate_agreement_draft1. There were notes in the margins, comments about removing Emily's name, rewriting sections that implied parental rights. It read more like a plan to bypass her than to include her. Deeper in the folders, Emily found an email export file. She hesitated, then opened it. Within minutes, she saw email threads with Ava, going back to before the embryo transfers, some practical, but what stood out was one dated 2 weeks before the transfer. From Nathan Monroe to Ava Martinez, subject, just in case I saved everything to the drive. If anything goes wrong, I want to make sure we're covered. No one else has access. Not even her. Emily sat perfectly still. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. She opened the shared legal folder and began copying files. The screenshots, the messages, the document drafts, every piece of it. She labeled them by date. By topic, Rachel would know what to do with them. Then she opened a new document. She typed, Evidence. Recovered backup drive, found August 12th upstairs closet, shoebox underneath. She listed the key items. Unsent messages between Nathan and Ava, draft surrogacy contract with key omissions. Photo proof of Ava and Nathan's physical closeness. Email referencing drive concealment. She saved the document and backed it up twice. Emily closed the laptop, sat in silence, and looked around the room. Nothing had changed in the house, but now she had proof, not just suspicion, not just missing signatures or names crossed off certificates, real evidence, and he had saved it himself. The envelope arrived on a Monday morning, slid halfway beneath the front door like it didn't carry the weight of everything inside it. Emily knew what it was before she picked it up. The court seal, the pale blue paper, the formal typeface of it, official. She stood there for a moment, barefoot on the hallway floor, the baby monitor blinking softly behind her. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks from that day. She didn't feel ready, but then again, she hadn't felt ready for any of this. Not for the photo on Nathan's phone, not for the messages Ava had deleted, not for the DNA results that revealed the truth she never wanted to believe. And yet, here she was, documented, organized, and surrounded by proof of a betrayal that reached further than anyone could have guessed. She called Rachel immediately. It's happening, she said. Rachel didn't ask okay, let's get everything printed at Gripple copies and get Charlotte on the phone this afternoon. That afternoon, the dining room table was covered in stacks. Emily and Rachel had set up labeled sections, texts and photos, email threads, records, legal timeline, affidavits. Each pile was clipped, highlighted and backed up on 2 drives and a shared cloud folder. In one corner sat a binder Emily had titled Emily's Role, filled with photos of her painting the nursery, attending Ava's early ultrasounds, baby shower invitations with her name as host, receipts from appointments, her name written on baby, gift cards, all the quiet details of motherhood no court clerk had ever asked to verify. Charlotte joined them on a video call later that evening. "The court is familiar with surrogacy cases," she said, her voice steady and composed, "but not like this. Our argument is twofold: establish parentage, yes, but also establish fraud, intent, and emotional harm. We're not just asking for rights, we're exposing deception." Emily nodded. "Do I testify?" "Yes," Charlotte said. "So will Ava if we call her, and we might. She's changed her tune since this began. If we subpoena her, she can't refuse. But Nathan's attorney is going to frame this as a family matter gone sour. He'll try to reduce it to drama. We stay focused." The night before the hearing, Emily didn't sleep much. She walked the house at 2 a.m., stopping at the crib. The baby stirred once, then settled. Emily pressed her palm gently to the mattress. Not a biological bond, not a paper trail, but this, the sleepless nights, the feedings, the instinct to check for breath, even when the baby was perfectly fine. That was the kind of love no judge could quantify, but it was real. The courthouse was cold. Rachel came with her. Charlotte met them in the lobby, carrying her own briefcase of files. Nathan arrived 10 minutes later, flanked by a lawyer in a charcoal suit. Ava did not come. The judge was a woman, middle-aged, with a careful face that revealed little. The room was small, no gallery, no jury, just legal teams and a few chairs. Charlotte began with a petition requesting the court recognize Emily standing to pursue parentage based on long-term intent, conduct, and pre-birth involvement. Then she moved into the second part: willful misrepresentation, concealment of facts, and an orchestrated effort to exclude Emily from the birth and subsequent custody. Nathan's attorney objected, claiming it was a private agreement between adults that had broken down. Charlotte responded with the email, where Ava called herself Nathan's fiancée, then the nurse's note about who was listed as mother at admission. Then the photo of Nathan holding Ava's hand in the delivery room, then the draft contract with Emily's name missing entirely. Then, finally, the screenshots from the backup drive. Emily didn't look at Nathan. She kept her eyes on the judge, her voice calm when asked to speak. She told the truth, not just about the child, but about the erosion of trust, the deliberate choices that had led them to this room. She spoke of being erased, of walking into a hospital expecting her daughter and leaving with paperwork that didn't list her name. The judge didn't make a ruling that day, but as they left, Charlotte leaned over and whispered, "She heard you, and that matters." Emily had just come in from checking the mail when she saw the car in the driveway, a small, silver sedan familiar, but one she hadn't seen in months. It took her a moment to register whose it was: Ava. She stood beside the driver's side door, arms crossed, eyes low. There was no baby seat in the back, no sunglasses on her head, no sign of the woman Emily remembered smiling too brightly at her. Baby shower. Emily didn't move. Ava looked up and met her gaze. Then, without a word, she opened the car door and pulled something out of the passenger seat, a manila envelope, thick and slightly bent at the corners. She walked up the path slowly, with a kind of hesitance Emily had never seen in her before. She didn't ask to come in. She stopped just short of the porch steps. "I won't stay," Ava said quietly. Emily said nothing. Ava held out the envelope. Her hand trembled slightly. "I should have done this a long time ago." Emily reached for it, but didn't open it. "Yet, I found it while cleaning out my storage unit," Ava continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was in the drawer with the appointment forms. I thought I'd tossed everything, but I hadn't." She paused. Her eyes were red, though no tears fell. "I signed it that day, the first ultrasound. You were waiting outside because they said only one person could come in. Nathan didn't tell you that I asked them to put my name on the record. I told him it was temporary, for the scan only. He said we'd fix it later." Emily looked down. At the envelope, she still hadn't said a word. "I'm not going to the hearing," Ava added. "I've said what I needed in the affidavit, and the court already has it. But I needed to give this to you, Not them, you. Emily finally spoke. Why now? Ava took a shaky breath. Because no matter what happened between me and Nathan, what we did to you wasn't just a mistake. It was a lie that kept going, and I kept letting it. I thought I could separate it. The pregnancy, the child, the choices, but I couldn't, I thought. If I gave you what should have been yours from the beginning, it wouldn't fix everything, but maybe it would return something. Emily still didn't open the envelope. You were kind to me, Ava said softly. Before any of this, I think that's the part that makes it worse. There was no apology after that, just silence, and Emily didn't offer forgiveness. Not because she couldn't, but because she wasn't sure what it would mean anymore. Ava turned to leave. She stopped just before reaching the car. It's not about Nathan for me anymore, she said. I just hope you get to stay in her life. She drove away slowly. Tires crunching over gravel. Emily stood on the porch for a long moment before finally sitting on the steps and pulling the envelope open. Inside was a single ultrasound photo dated, time-stamped, with the clinic logo. In the corner, and beneath the image in blue ink, was Ava's signature. Not scribbled or rushed. Clear, neat, deliberate. A consent form attached to the back showed Emily's name listed as the intended parent. Her name had been there from the beginning. The form had simply never been submitted. She brought it inside and added it to the binder. Not because it would change everything in court, but because it was the first piece of this whole story that was voluntarily returned to her. The courtroom felt colder than usual. The walls were the same pale beige, the chairs hard and creaking with every shift, but there was a weight in the air that hadn't been there during the first hearing. This time, it wasn't just about paperwork. It was about intention. About truth. Emily sat behind the petitioner's table with Charlotte to her left and Rachel behind them in the gallery. Across from them, Nathan was present, stiffer than before, eyes darting between his attorney and the judge. He hadn't spoken directly to Emily since the hearing began 2 weeks earlier. The evidence had been reviewed, testimonies taken, affidavits submitted. All that remained now were final statements and a question the judge had not yet asked. Charlotte stood and summarized Emily's position one last time. She spoke of pre-birth conduct, of planning, of the consistent role Emily had taken in the baby's life. She presented the emotional and physical investment Emily had made, including care during Ava's pregnancy, the nursery, the appointments, and the first months of the baby's life. Nathan's attorney countered with the technicality of biology. He referenced the absence of Emily's name on the birth certificate, the lack of a finalized contract, and the reality that Ava had carried a child genetically hers and Nathan's. And then the judge raised her hand slightly, just enough to quiet the room. She had barely spoken throughout most of the hearing, letting the attorneys lead. But now, she looked directly at Emily. Ms. Monroe, the judge said, her voice calm but firm. You've shared a lot about your involvement before and after the birth, but I'd like to ask you plainly, and I'd like you to answer plainly. Emily nodded when this surrogacy arrangement was discussed. The judge said, who did all parties understand to be the intended mother of the child. Emily's hands were folded tightly on her lap. She didn't look at Nathan. She didn't need to. She looked only at the judge. I did, she said. From the very beginning, we agreed that I would be the child's mother. Ava offered to carry the baby because I couldn't. She told me she was doing it for me. Nathan and I chose the name together. We painted the nursery for a child I thought would be ours. Every decision was made under the understanding that I was going to raise her. The judge turned to Nathan. And you, Mr. Monroe. Nathan hesitated. His lawyer shifted but said nothing. Nathan began. We were going to raise the baby together. That was the plan. Was Ms. Martinez ever intended to be the child's mother? The judge asked. Nathan looked down. She wasn't supposed to be. No. The judge's pen tapped the folder gently. Then she turned back to Charlotte. Counsel, she said. Let's be absolutely clear. You've presented medical documents, a recorded pattern of care and intent, and signed statements, one from the birth mother herself, indicating that Ms. Monroe was the intended parent, correct? Yes, Your Honor, Charlotte replied, including an original signed ultrasound form naming Emily Monroe as the intended parent. Provided by Ms. Martinez just before this hearing. The judge nodded. She paused for a moment, glancing between the two tables. When it comes to surrogacy, particularly informal arrangements, this court looks not only at biology or documentation, but intention. Who intended to raise the child, who acted as the child's parent, who was acknowledged by all parties as the parent before disputes arose. Emily felt her chest tighten. Parentage, the judge continued, is not a title awarded by genetics alone. It is established by actions, by agreement, and by care. She closed the file before her. This court recognizes that Ms. Emily Monroe was the intended mother of the child. Proceedings for legal parentage will move forward on that basis. The gavel did not fall, but everything else did. The ruling came 2 weeks after the judge's final statement. A written decision, 8 pages long, was delivered by courier to Charlotte's office. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her phone on speaker, as Charlotte read through it, line by line. The court had ruled in her favor. Legal parentage was being granted retroactively. The judge cited intention, conduct, pre-birth preparations, and post-birth care. She acknowledged the absence of formal paperwork, but emphasized the pattern of behavior that confirmed Emily as the child's true mother. Custody arrangements were outlined in detail. Ava had waived all claims. Nathan, however, was granted supervised visitation, pending further review. The judge noted his pattern of deceptive conduct and concern for deliberate misrepresentation. In matters of parental rights, it should have been a moment of relief. But Emily didn't feel calm. She felt braced, because Nathan wasn't someone who accepted outcomes quietly. She was right. The first sign came 3 days later. Emily received an email from the daycare, sent her polite, but urgent. They'd been contacted by someone claiming to be the child's full-time guardian, a man who said the court was mistaken and that an appeal was underway. He'd requested a copy of the pickup list and asked that Emily's access be restricted until the matter was corrected. Emily stared at the message for a long time. She forwarded it to Charlotte with a single line. "He's trying again." Charlotte responded in under 5 minutes. Reply, "Nothing. I'll handle it." Forward, everything. Later that afternoon, Emily visited the daycare in person. She brought a copy of the court ruling and spoke directly with the director. The woman, clearly shaken by the situation, thanked her for coming. "We weren't going to change anything," she said, "but it rattled us. He sounded so ... confident." That was Nathan's pattern. Always calm, always reasonably until the surface cracked. Emily had spent years watching him rewrite history with a straight face. Charlotte filed an injunction that same day, blocking Nathan from contacting institutions regarding the child without written court approval. It passed within 24 hours, but Nathan didn't stop. A week later, Rachel called Emily from the pharmacy. She was picking up a prescription for the baby when the system flagged the insurance. According to the account, coverage had been transferred. Nathan had moved the baby under a different provider, his own, without informing Emily or listing her as a dependent. This time, Emily didn't wait. She drove straight to Charlotte's office and handed over everything: emails, voicemails, documents. She was tired, but not helpless. Not anymore. Charlotte moved quickly. A hearing was scheduled within the week. The judge, already familiar with the case, was blunt. "Mr. Monroe," she said from the bench, "this court will not tolerate continued attempts to undermine its ruling. You are testing the boundaries of contempt." Nathan stood silent. His lawyer offered a vague apology: miscommunication, timing, transition. But the judge wasn't swayed. The injunction was extended. Supervised visitation was reduced to bi-weekly under agency oversight. Any further interference, the judge said, and custody terms would be reevaluated again with consequences. As they left the courtroom, Nathan caught Emily's eye. For a moment, it looked like he might say something, but instead, he looked away. Met Emily in the parking lot with the baby, bundled in a soft blue blanket. Eyes blinking in the sunlight, Emily took her in her arms and felt the weight of everything that had happened: the loss, the deception, the constant fight to reclaim what was never supposed to be taken from her. But this time, there was nothing left for Nathan to rewrite. She had the truth, the child, and the law on her side now, and she was finally ready to move forward with both feet planted firmly in her own story.